You're listening to The Archetype Effect, conversations redefining power, purpose and leadership for women and the coaches who guide them. I'm Ros Cardinal, leadership coach and creator of the Women's Leader Archetypes. Together we'll explore the real stories, the research and reflections that help women rise with clarity and authentic power. Welcome back to The Archetype Effect. Today I'm joined by Kim Dunlop, who completed the Women's Leader Archetype accreditation a couple of years ago, and we've spent time together since then. We've worked together and developed this wonderful partnership. So I'm really excited to introduce Kim to you. And one of the things I've been increasingly curious about is what happens after we learn something really meaningful about ourselves, and not the sort of big transformation and before and after, but that the little quiet shifts, the things that we kind of tuck away and return to over the years. It's like those moments where we find ourselves responding differently, thinking differently, maybe even just understanding ourselves with a bit more compassion. And I think that many women feel like personal growth needs to be something really massive, that they need to be able to hang their hat on it and go, see, I've changed. But it doesn't have to be that way for people. I don't think that's how it works for a lot of us. I think growth is often quieter. It's about remembering. It's about recognition. It's about becoming comfortable with who we've become. And today is a conversation about what stays with us once we've been given language for ourselves. So welcome, Kim.
Oh, Ros, what a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much for being, part of this. It's incredible. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Wonderful. So let's start by telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So where do I start? A little bit of background. My background has been in corporate property for many years. However, my passion, Ros, where you and I align so well, is women leadership, people development space. I've been really sinking my teeth into more things in that space. And it's been so rewarding, just really unfolding. It's been such an interesting journey as well, to say the least, transitioning from that space, from property into people development. And whilst I still do a bit of property work, it's something that I've been noticing as well, is the changes and the little changes as well that I've been noticing in myself as I step through the leadership landscape. And it's been a really interesting piece, from looking at corporates to looking at individuals which were working in these working environments, understanding where people are at and where they want to be. And there's a lot to unpack. So I'm looking forward to discussing that with you today.
Yeah. And just on that, working in that leadership space, and as you and I both are passionate about working with women as well, I was going to save this for a bit later on, but I'll touch on it up front. What conversations do you seem to find yourself having over and over again? Are we rehashing old ground a lot, or are we really starting to move forward?
I love this question, Ros, and I think it's great that we're sort of jumping into it straight off. I feel, and what I'm seeing and noticing as well from a lot of people, is it's almost like they're stuck in the content, or stuck in that the content of the story of who did what. And there's kind of like this blame game of some sort that's going on within the corporate environment. And it's a really interesting piece, because it's almost like people are not doing their job, so we're going to blame that other person. They're not fulfilling those tasks, so we're going to blame the other person. However, from a leadership point of view, what I'm noticing is it's not shifting around. And you started off with that language piece, and even with the archetypes, which is what I really embodied, was just learning that new language and that landscape of where we're sitting, whether we're sitting in the shadow archetypes or whether or not we're sitting in the sovereign, being the more empowered feminine. And so I feel the biggest piece, which is really so important for us to really look at and dive into more, is around that. How do we change that, where we actually are empowering? We're not playing the blame game out here, we're turning it into the A game in here. And so how do we really empower ourselves to sit in that position even more?
And that's so important, because you do find, I've noticed the same thing in corporates too, is that blaming, but also denial, that piece of even when they've asked for feedback, you'll get the, no, that's not happening. It's not how it works around here. And then you get people who are lower down the hierarchy who give up giving feedback. They've got great ideas. They've got thoughts. They've got opinions about things. They want to give feedback. They want to be heard, particularly younger generations want to be heard, and they're just not being. It's like they're hitting a brick wall. And I think you're right. You've touched on the archetypes as something that could be really valuable. They are aimed at women, obviously, but it's really valuable for people in understanding what's actually really going on here. What are we seeing in the leaders above us? What are we seeing in the people that you and I work with, for example? What is actually operating inside those organisations that means that they are moving into that shadow space of not accepting feedback, not wanting to change, not wanting to be flexible around things.
I love that, Ros. And it kind of then leads on to one of your shadow archetypes, which is the hermit. So if someone was sitting in the hermit and they're really avoiding that whole piece and not actually giving feedback, it's kind of building up within their system. And we're not creating like a more systemic way of thinking. We're actually just hoarding onto that, and we're holding onto it because we just want to avoid. We just want to keep on avoiding. And then that's not great for our system. And then that's not great for us to be seen as well. To then be able to move out of that shadow archetype, to be able to go to the higher ones, to actually access that. So there's something in that around going, okay, why is that important for that person to be seen? And this is probably one of the things that I really loved about your archetypes was it was knowing when you are actually sitting in that position. And when you're sitting in that leadership style and, you know, what style are you wearing today, you can then become aware of how you show up, say, for a meeting or how you show up for a boardroom session. You can then start to know, okay, what do I need to support myself? And so it kind of tail dubs with a particular platform that I've created, which is called Suits You. And this is why I loved your archetypes, because it's like, what is suiting you as a female leader? What do you want to show up today as? And I think that's the part, Ros, that we really need to tackle and going, as long as we value that piece, if we're sitting in the hermit and we're actually avoiding that conflict, you know, is that a great thing? Because we need to value it and own it.
Absolutely. I love the way you say, what style are you wearing today? And that ties in really, really well with what suits you, because that's what it's about. It's about flexibility of style. That's the whole point of the model, is the flexibility. It's around choosing the right style at the right time with the right people for the right reasons. And I think that's one of the things that happens when we start to become restricted and reactive, is that our options narrow. And I've talked about that quite a bit on the podcast over the first 2 seasons, about the narrowing that happens. We start to see fewer ways forward. So instead of having access to all the archetypes that we need, we start to look at it through the lens of only the one that we're stuck in. And then our opportunity to change things, everything narrows, our depth of response, our access to things. And it does feel normal. I talked about this in the last episode of the 2nd season, which is about, it becomes personality. We start to feel, this is who I am. I'm just a perfectionist. I'm just somebody who prefers to take things slowly. I'm just somebody who prefers not to have that difficult conversation. We start to take it on as part of us rather than seeing it as just, like I said, what are you wearing today? And if you're wearing it, you can take it off and put something else on instead. So I love that.
Yeah. And I love that you shared the word flexibility, Ros, because that was actually something that I was going to acknowledge with the archetypes and the work that you've created. Is, for me personally, I really noticed that when I started doing the archetypes straight off. That was that flexibility of going, okay, who is my audience? What type of archetype am I showing up as? And what are the other people in that environment showing up as well? And so it was really good to kind of look at that and going, should I be choosing a different archetype? But there's that, probably that open-mindedness that I have within that space, and probably from doing this work as well, because I am so passionate about it, that it doesn't have to become our identity. It's not our label, you know, having the label of, I'm a hermit today. We can kind of take that label off, and we can take that label off and go, we can hand it to someone else, and we can choose to actually access and put the sovereign or the wise woman on. and really just center ourselves to actually be that person, you know?
You give me an idea. I think there's probably going to be a set of badges next and maybe fridge magnets as well.
I love it. I love it.
So when you did your own profile, because everybody who goes through the accreditation does their own profile, was there anything in there that surprised you about your profile?
So funny. I don't know if you remember, but I was a bit of a mixed bag.
That's right.
And it kind of didn't surprise me, Ros, because I feel like I've got this right brain, left brain type scenario that's always going on. So I went, I bet you it comes out and it's not clear. So I was kind of a good candidate in some ways to kind of show that what you were talking about before and what you were sharing was we don't have to become that identity. So I was kind of fully aware that because I access different personality types, I wonder what the report's going to turn up.
And that's the flexibility, that ability to right style, right time for the right audience. And that's what we're aiming for, is to widen the options rather than narrowing the options. Even though for some people they might come out really strongly as a particular type, like to say they're a really strong wise woman and perhaps weaker on the other ones. It's that widening of the options. Like, yes, you're a wise woman, that's amazing, but there's going to be times when you need tribe builder. There's going to be times when you need your warrior to step up, and how are you actually able to access those and bring them into your world in a way that adds value and makes sense to you. So it's been a little while. It's been a couple of years, I think, since you did your accreditation. Time flies, I've got, honestly.
No, I can't believe
it's like that. But it's been a while for you. So there's times where you sort of think to yourself, you notice yourself doing something and then you go, oh, that's that archetype showing up for me.
Yeah, I love that question. And it's funny, I've been getting a bit passionate lately. And so as I've been getting passionate, I feel like I've been in the warrior woman. And yeah, and I kind of feel really empowered in that way, you know? And so I've been noticing that. And then other times I've gone quieter and I've been sitting sort of in the wise woman piece. So I have actually been associating those names to how I've been showing up in certain ways. So yeah, it's been quite a little bit of a chuckle for me.
And I think that's one of the things that that when I was creating the model, that was the purpose behind it, was to give women language for this. It was about attaching language to it. So we've got a way of describing it so we can shortcut it. So rather than thinking to ourselves, I'm doing all of these things, you can just go, oh yeah, that's the wise woman. Is there a particular concept that's really stuck for you when you think about the accreditation program and how you've used it going forward? What's really sort of stuck with you, something that you use regularly or refer to or think of?
Probably the biggest piece with the model and what you've created, which I thought was just absolutely phenomenal, was having the 4 archetypes, the empowered archetypes, and then having the 4 shadows. So then knowing that connection piece of when you might integrate or disintegrate. So for me, that was the language that I kind of associated with knowing where I was at. And so, and I'll make you laugh, Ros, when I first saw it and started doing it, I was like, oh, I want to be the sovereign, the sovereign woman. And it was like, she's the pinnacle. And it was like this achiever type person within me. But then I went, okay, the shadow archetype is the tyrant, so it's like, and it's that competitive. So you could get really competitive in that respect. And so I kind of went, okay, I can see those qualities coming out when I'm, say, under stress a little bit, so you can see the qualities of it. So it was just a wonderful way to associate, I really loved the labeling and how you named the empowered types versus the shadow archetypes. Real standout for me.
Thank you. Now, one of the things that we've been exploring through this season of the archetypes is about growth isn't necessarily or not always about becoming someone better. Sometimes it's just simply becoming more of yourself. So when you think about, say, your own personal journey over the last few years, do you think you've really changed, or do you think you've just understood yourself better?
I would say I've been coming back home to myself. And so the second part where you said, like, really understanding yourself better, just really coming back home. I feel like I have been, say, not showing up as my full self through supporting others with where others are at. And I kind of question that a lot, Ros, from the point of view of going, I was in the corporate space, I was always sort of put down because I was happy. And so I would sort of sit back a lot and really kind of not bring that whole energy forward. And so that's something that I really noticed that I'm coming home to that more and more.
And that's something that we observe a lot in corporate. I see it, and I know you see it as well, is this women being seen as too much or not enough.
Yes.
When women bring their authentic self to work, it's often you're too loud, you're too opinionated, you're too talkative, you're too happy, you're too whatever it is. Or they get told you're not enough, you're not assertive enough, you're not confident enough, you don't speak up enough. And it's that Goldilocks spot that we really seem to struggle to hit. So do you think women spend too much of their time trying to become somebody else, to fit into that idea of the Goldilocks spot, and maybe not enough time just becoming comfortable with who they are?
Yes, I do agree. I actually really agree, Ros. I do feel like that those lines are blurred, and they have been blurred for quite some time. And I feel that probably the trade piece, because we're trading to be part of the whole hierarchy within a corporate world. We're trying to toe the line. You know, if we're seen to be being too much or being a little bit different or being your individual self or that authentic self, that I might not form part of the culture, or might not be seen as being professional. And so I really do agree with that. I really wholly agree with that statement, because I know throughout my working career, I would say funny things to people, and sometimes they're a little bit inappropriate. However, when you watch the reaction of someone else and it actually lands in a funny way, and you're knowing your audience or you've built rapport with that person, that it's actually okay. It's more just knowing that piece, probably, because we need to have a bit more humor. I feel like we need to bring back more humor, and that's what I want to bring back into the corporate world, is that humor.
Yes, let's stop being so serious and start learning to laugh at ourselves a bit. And it's interesting, isn't it, this constant push-pull of women trying to find that sweet spot. So what becomes possible in your experience with the women that you coach when they stop fighting themselves and just go, maybe they've discovered it through the archetypes or through some other work that you've done, when they go, actually, I believe I can be authentically myself and achieve all the things I want to achieve and just show up the way that I want to show up? What have you seen become possible for women?
Yeah, I love this question. I'm going to use the word stuck. I feel like that they orientate in being stuck, and there's a lot of content that's being held in our heads, that we're not kind of moving through our bodies to actually get to where we want to be, which is pretty much, I don't know whether it's just a feminine thing. And I will say this, that I do feel like men have this quality as well. However, there's this nurturing quality within women, right? That we feel that we have to be over responsible for other people, for feeling that they need to feel good about themselves, that we actually forget about ourselves. And so in that piece, we're not showing up as our true selves. And so we're kind of forgetting. And so we're valuing the parts that we're frustrated with, that we're stuck with, that we're holding on to. And we keep on holding it on like a label, again, like a badge of honor. And it's like we're holding on to these labels going, yep, I'm frustrated, I'm annoyed, I'm upset, but we're holding on to it. We're not actually shifting it. And so I'm supporting women in that way to actually really shift that, to go, what is it we really want to go towards? Because there's something you value about this piece, that this label or this jacket that, that you're turning up as.
It's become, like I said, part of the identity, part of their personality. They sort of can't separate what they do from who they are. Now, obviously, without breaching confidentiality, what are some of the patterns that you notice showing up maybe most often for the women that you work with? So things like, what do women struggle with the most? What sort of conversations do you find yourself having over and over again, but with different women each time, or maybe the same women each time? What themes are you seeing? And what do you think women are probably underestimating about themselves?
Okay. The driver programs and patterns that I'm seeing really unfolding is this over responsibility piece, external authority. So we're kind of handing our powers away to someone else. There's a level of judgment that we hold on ourselves, simultaneously holding on someone else. And we're not choosing to actually go towards what we want. So there's this moving away from piece, which really talks to that hermit piece of there's conflict and we're not going to communicate about it. So I'm just going to move away from it even more. So it's kind of this constant patterning or programming or driver that is really driving that piece for a lot of women. I see that a lot.
Yeah. And where do you see women carrying too much? So I love the concept of over responsibility, and I have talked about that on the podcast. And I remember I think it was you who was probably the very first person to actually use that phrase. I knew what I was trying to say, but you were the first one who said to me, over responsibility. I went, that's a great word. I'm going to hang on to that. And I have used that. So thank you. But when we think about over responsibility, women generally do carry too much. They carry more than their fair share. So with the women that you work with, what are you seeing as the driver underneath that? Are we talking perfectionism, boundaries, confidence? What's actually really going on? Why is it we allow ourselves to carry too much?
I feel like it's an innate gift. So I'm actually going to highlight that and really acknowledge that it can sometimes be an innate gift that we hold, being nurturers, mothers, generational. So there's lots of things where we feel like we're giving. So the over responsible piece is the giving to others, the validation, of helping someone else. However, with looking at that pattern of programming, we forget that we're being under responsible for ourselves. So we're kind of not looking at the boundaries and going, what do we need in this transaction? What is it we need in this environment? So if I'm being over responsible and constantly giving, then the energy of, say, the shadow archetypes will then come up. And so the martyr would then come up. And then the martyr then would then be a bit annoyed, Ros, because the martyr is actually giving to someone else, but then they're not getting in return. And so it's a really interesting space because the opportunity for women is to go towards what is it they truly need, because there's something that they're valuing about that. And how do we move on that line towards, say, a healthy responsibility where you've got this boundary piece?
And something that I wanted to touch on here is this learned response. We learn this. And for a lot of women, we learn it in very early childhood. And I know that you know my story, but I haven't talked about it openly on the podcast before, which is my over responsibility was learned from being the eldest child in a fairly dysfunctional family. And we learn really early on that we are responsible for other people, for their responses, their reactions. When you have to parent your parents from quite a young age, it builds this over responsibility and it becomes who you are. You're the one who's responsible. You're the one who picks up. You're the one who does the things that other people aren't doing. And so as a response to threat, it becomes very ingrained in who we are. And there's a lot of unpacking required in order to work through that and move into that space where we do recognize that it's over responsible for things. And then, like you said, under responsible for ourselves or to ourselves. So when you work with women around this, what are some of the tools and techniques that you would use, or what would you recommend to women if they want to sort of start addressing this source of being over responsible?
Yeah, thank you for that. I also want to firstly acknowledge you in just sharing that piece as well, because what you did unpack and how we looked at those structures to work out how that was created as a learnt behavior. And I'm kind of just going to give a little bit of insight around, say, we can hold on to those programs or patterns or that learned behavior, but we can then start to, as adults, start to tap into the thinking. So what are the thoughts that we're thinking when that is triggered in that moment? What is it we're feeling? And then what is the action that we want to take? So they're kind of the basic sort of tools which we can then now map in as an adult, because we become aware. And so probably the biggest piece which is really becoming aware of that situation, because it's actually not the person who's presenting They're just giving you feedback in that moment. So they're giving you the feedback that something is not resolved within ourselves. And so it's, can we then say, thank you so much for showing up this way, because it's now showing me how I'm showing up, because that's where the trigger comes up. That's where we get reactive and go, oh my God, I can't believe that person said this. Then we get caught in the story. And so if we can catch it and really hold on to it and go, okay, great, I caught that today. That person triggered something within me. And how could I responsibly talk through that process with someone else who I know, could offer me a safe or flexibility on actually trying to unpack that?
I love that. And it is that the story piece. And Brené Brown says it. She says, what's the story I'm telling myself? And that's such a useful piece, isn't it? To kind of go, am I responding from the reality of what's happening in this moment for me, or am I responding from that old story, the story that kept me safe? Because acknowledging it, and again, I've talked about this on the pod, about acknowledging the fact that these have been useful patterns. They've served us well in the past. They protected us when we were young or when we were children, or perhaps in early workspaces where we maybe were threatened in some way. They've been protective and they've been really helpful for us. And it's that letting go and moving into what's my next phase of life, I suppose. Like you've said, the suit, we're going to take that jacket off and hang it on the back of a chair, and we're going to pick up another one and put it on. So as someone who supports women professionally, what do you think women really need in the workplace?
I kind of want to add to what you've just shared just before, which I kind of feel that this might answer part of it, because I actually want to acknowledge it because I think it's really important, is what you shared about the protection of those patterns. And what if I said that they can then now become your superpower? So it's something that you've learned for such a long time, which then feeds into your archetype piece, Ros, where we can actually get flexibility on. And so that protection piece, when we acknowledge it and understand it a little bit, and we don't have to necessarily go into the story all the time. Some people are wanting to, others don't necessarily need to, but they can actually resolve what it is that's actually causing that protection mechanism to come up. And so it can become a superpower for you to use when you feel you need to access it. And so that's what I feel is what women could be supported in the corporate world, is really understanding who you are. And so we all know our identity. We all know the label, I'm an assistant, or I'm a managing director, or I'm a director, or I'm a partner, whatever it is you are the label of. But who are you underneath, to gain a bit more understanding, to then know who you are dealing with, say, in a boardroom or in a one-on-one meeting, to then know whether or not you need to bring that protective piece up, and then just check in with yourself to actually then go, okay, can I just come back to you? Thanks for this meeting. Can I just come back to you just with my response? I don't have an answer as yet. So there's the protective mechanism coming into play, because you know it's being triggered. And then you can then go, okay, that was interesting, because I got a bit emotional about that piece. There was something about that. So there's value in what that other person is presenting, because it's just showing you a different pattern about how they showed up. And to give you a little example, it's a really simple example, and I love sharing this example, Ros. It's like going to a bar, right? You're standing at the bar and I walk up to the bar, and I can walk up in two scenarios, right? I walk up to the bar and I could be wearing a flowing dress, take no attention as to who's around me, Ros. I just turn up to the bar, and then the barman slides across and says to the blonde, what would you like to drink? And I go, I'd like 2 vodkas, thank you. And everyone else around me is actually looking at me going, oh my God, I can't believe it. I've been standing here for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. However, the way that I show up is I make sure I check in with people at the bar to see if they have actually been served. And so I'm observing people as I'm standing at the bar to then notice who is next. But that is an orientation of how we show up. Are we putting ourselves first, or are we looking at putting others first? So it's just a simple analogy to kind of look at the bar situation is, are we just turning up and going, I don't care, I'm not going to check in with anyone, I'm just going to turn up at the bar and order my drinks.
Or worse, I'm going to elbow everyone else out of the way so I can get to the bar to order my drinks.
Exactly. But that can sometimes be an analogy in a meeting with women and one-on-one. The other person is putting themselves first. They're really clear about what it is they need from the other person. And that could be a trigger point to that person. And so I sort of say to women, what is it you need? Because we're not actually expressing what we need. We're not going towards what we actually truly need. If we get clear on that, we can be more successful.
We're standing at the bar and everyone's elbowing us out of the way and we're not even kind of putting our hand up and going, excuse me.
Exactly, Ros.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's talking about what women actually need in the workplace. I think one of the things that I've been working with women on, it comes up over and over again, is around this, how do I move out of my shadow archetype, my fear response, into something more productive? And for a lot of them, the thing that's been really helping is scripts, this idea of having something in your kit bag. So when you do freeze and go, I don't know what to say next, you've actually got something you can draw out and go, here's the script. And an example of that might be, and I've given this to women, when they're in a meeting and they put an idea forward, which does happen. You put an idea forward and it kind of gets ignored. It gets glossed over. People move on to the next agenda point. And then maybe 10 minutes later, maybe perhaps a man in the room raises exactly the same issue and it gets taken up enthusiastically. Everyone's like, oh my God, that is such a great idea, Bob. And for women, they often sit there going, I froze. I didn't know what to say because it was such a blatant theft of my idea. And the fact that people had ignored me when I said it, now all of a sudden they're praising it as if it's the greatest thing. And I didn't know what to do because my immediate response was to freeze and not do anything, followed by, if I did do something, would I make a fool of myself? But the script piece is something just simple that they can go, if this happens, here's what you need to do, which is something like, Bob, thank you for expanding on my idea. Isn't it great we're on the same page with this? How about we have a meeting offline and really flesh this out so we can bring it back in a format that's ready to be signed off? And what that's doing is it's not diminishing Bob. It's not throwing a tantrum, as women often get labelled as too emotional in the workplace. It's just simply and clearly going, thanks for expanding on my idea. And so scripts like that can be really helpful. Is that something that you find works for women in your experience as well?
100%. And do you know why it's so powerful, Ros? Is because it's the integration piece. And that's the part that we're not practicing, is integrating the words. And so I've been doing a lot of that integration work with people and women in particular to get them to speak the words. What is it you'd like to share with me? What's going on? They've given me that scenario that you've just spoken about where someone's stolen their idea. And so it's like, what would you have liked to have said? So we're running those scripts and we're actually running them through our bodies. We're running them through our systems in order to then be more prepared for next time. Because when they freeze, it's our system telling us, okay, I've been triggered in some ways, or, that person has stolen my idea, as simple as that. And I'm upset about that because it was an idea that I brought forward and I didn't know how to respond. And my system just went into freeze. And so it's really noticing that and then practicing those scripts. So I love it, Ros. I think that is fantastic. And I do a lot of that script work with people to then role play that as well. Yeah.
And also something that I find effective for women as well, and look, for everybody, it's not just a woman thing, but if they do get in a situation, say a difficult conversation one-on-one, where things do start to get perhaps a little bit heated, and I actually did this just earlier today with a coaching client, is she said, look, something will happen, I'll start a conversation, the person will get defensive, and then she said, I just can't think of what to say. It's almost like I lose my capacity to think straight, and I then feel really triggered myself and so on. And so again, going back to scripts, I said, look, one of the things you can do is just take some space, like just say to the person, the point you've raised is actually really valid. I need to think about that. Let's just go make a cup of tea and come back. Or if you're dealing with somebody and it's really difficult and it's clear that things aren't going anywhere, you can say, look, I love the fact that you're so passionate about this, or I can see how important this is to you. So in order to give it the importance that it deserves, give it the attention it deserves, we need to perhaps think on this overnight and come back tomorrow. So
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong. You don't have to finish a conversation on the day in the moment. You can absolutely put a space in the middle where you go, actually, let's just take a break so we can both think about this and come back to it.
And I 100% agree with you as well. Because it's giving that pause, reflection, is giving that person time to recalibrate. And you're changing the state as well. You're changing the state, you're kind of cutting it off, changing the state to go, let's just take a break. So I really love that. And I think that's really valid and so important for us to do that when we know that it's not comfortable for ourselves.
Yeah, to reset the nervous system. And I said to this client, I said, there's nothing wrong with even being vulnerable yourself and saying, I'm actually not bringing my best self to this conversation right now. I just need a little bit of time and space. Like I said, it can just be go and get a cup of tea and come back, or maybe it's reconvene tomorrow. But it's acknowledging that if emotions are heightened, nobody's at their best in the room. And it's better
100%.
to take the space.
And I love what you shared as well about acknowledging the other person and then equally showing your level of vulnerability, going, I'm not being at my best today. Can we reconvene at a different time? Can I just take that on notice? Can I just digest what you've shared? Because I really like what you've shared. The other part as well is, and I think, we could be going into different territory here, but and I heard this recently about a situation with two women and a man in a scenario where it was quite heated. And when I say this, it was like the women were not able to share their voices. And when I heard about the situation, it was kind of like the emotions were high. And it's not that the man was doing anything wrong. It was just that he had heightened emotions because he wanted some outcome. And the communication was just not getting through on either party. And so the third party person was watching this, but no one was actually interacting. So there was no one who was able to rise above to actually take it to a different level or regain, at a different time.
Yeah. So thinking on going back to your own coaching, how's your coaching philosophy evolved over time?
So I would say my philosophy is, what are my foundations? My foundations have always been, relationships. So in relationship, it's probably been the key thing, and communication in relationship with clients. And if you're not in relationship, then either they've expanded so much that they need to go outside and grow more, or I can't help them, because they're either stuck or not wanting to develop. And so I'm bringing a different edge. And so, yeah, that's probably a key thing for me now. And it's really is, are you teachable? Are you open for growth or change? Because a lot of people, I think, miss, and you and I have had this conversation before, Ros, is the growth, whether it's even in leadership, in business, and we're constantly leading ourselves and leading others, that if we don't have these robust conversations and we're always dancing around the subject, but we can have it in a compassionate and authoritative way, taking people into account and going, look, this is a great conversation. How can we unpack it a bit more? That's where the growth is, and that's where the uncomfortability is. And a lot of people are not realizing that if we can stretch ourselves and challenge ourselves, when we do get a little bit uncomfortable, that's where the key is.
So when you think about working with women, what do you wish more women actually understood about themselves?
That's an interesting question. I would have to go to one of the foundations of what I'm essentially teaching is really understanding your thought processes. When a thought comes up, what is it connected to? Is it the feeling? What's the feeling that it's connected to? What's important about it? And really, where are you placing your energy and attention? And are we being intentional about what we want to grow? Or are we just so stuck that we need to nurture ourselves a bit more? And that's the part that I'm really noticing. And if we do need more nurturing, that's fine. But it's then just acknowledging that as a female leader, going, I actually need more care and compassion. And I've got to do a bit of work on that before I can then start to stretch myself. So that's the piece which I really want women to start to understand. What is the thoughts? What is the actual process that they're running? Because I feel like a lot of women are self-sabotaging, and I'm sure it's equally the same with men. It just depends on the individual. The thoughts that we bring up, are we being kind to ourselves? Are we really looking after ourselves before we even step forward and actually help someone else within the work environment, or even in our families, Ros, you know?
I really love what you said about being intentional, because that's really critical, I think. So many of us drift through life not being intentional. We turn up to work and we lead without being intentional. We show up to our families in ways that are not intentional. And I think there's a lot of value in that concept of going, am I being intentional about how I show up? Or am I just being driven by my responses, like I said, that patterning the story, without really ever sitting down and unpacking it and going, what's really going on for me now? What's, like you said, how my thoughts connect to my feelings? How does that drive what I'm doing? Rather than being clear about it and going, I'm actually choosing this, as opposed to being driven by it.
And when you just spoke then, it actually has given me another idea as well, is when you place intention, what is the context? You know, so like for a woman leader, what is the intention of, say, this meeting today? What is the script that I have to flip today? Or what is the script that I have to run in order to actually achieve my intentionality today? And if I'm stuck in the content, which is myself, the story, the content, if I'm stuck in myself, what do I need to support myself, to nurture myself before I step into this intentionality?
Yes, I really love that. Now, if we've got someone listening today who's maybe they feel like they're working really hard to become a better version of themselves, what would you want them to hear?
I'd probably ask them, Ros, what would they like to hear? Because I think what I'm really noticing and what I am really concerned about is there's so much noise, like so much noise that's going on. There's this podcast, there's this LinkedIn post, there's this article that you can read, there's this book that you can read. There's so much noise that everyone's being bombarded with, and with AI taking over. And look, whilst I really respect and am loving the AI piece, and I came up with this concept a little while ago, is we're uploading more information to AI, but what is the information that we're uploading to ourselves, which is our personal intelligence? What is it that we're uploading that's really intentional? So it really ties in that intentional piece. So what is the information? And it's really us becoming a bit more discerning, Ros, and going, okay, thank you for that book, or thank you for that podcast. I've got enough on at the moment. I'm actually just trying to get clear and intentional about where I want to be and what I need to achieve for myself and my family or my work environment, because I think we're just getting overloaded, that there's so much going on that we're not bringing it into integration. And that's where I think is the key for a lot of women to start shifting, is really getting intentional. What suit jacket am I putting on today to show up? Am I going to be the compassionate leader, the avoidant leader, or the dominant leader? And then what you said earlier on, Ros, is just really acknowledging that and announcing that, you know, that authenticity, bringing that forward and saying, I'm not on my best game today. However, I'm going to let Ros lead the meeting today. Like, there is a power play, massive power play, because you're actually just checking in with yourself. And so, yeah, in summary, I'd love women to really just start understand those signals and the signs, which is really where kind of my work is going, is we're not looking at the signals and the signs, you know, and going, okay, no, I don't want that today. I hope you don't mind. Compassionately, I don't want that. I can't take that on today. Can you support me? We're being resourceful. We're being responsible about what we need, as well as equally what another person needs.
And that's so important, isn't it? That freedom and authenticity to actually ask for what we want, because that's such a big missing piece for a lot of women, is this unmet needs in the workplace and not feeling like they can ask for what they want. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that leadership in traditional organisations is very hierarchical, and it's seen as strong is valued. This idea that you've got to be strong and you've got to have everything under control and you've got to have it together. And that idea of being vulnerable as a leader is seen as something that's not necessarily useful. And being able to actually role model vulnerability and go, yes, I was vulnerable today, but it was actually a good thing. It didn't hurt anybody around me. It actually encouraged people. It actually supported people. I think there's a big space there in corporates for recognition and understanding that women do lead differently from men, and that's okay. You know, it's more than okay. Women spend too much time, I feel, trying to emulate male styles of leadership, because that's what we see. Certainly my experience in a very male-dominated environment through corporate was this sense that most of the leaders were men. And so that's what we see and what we role model as we're growing up as younger leaders. And there really does need to, I think, be a space where it can be acknowledged that women's leadership is valuable exactly as it is. It doesn't have to be modified to become like a male style of leadership to be important and valued.
I totally agree. And just with you sharing that, and actually just reminded me of a quote, and it's kind of like a script similar to what you were sharing before. If you were a woman in a male-dominated area, which I have been and you have been as well, and it was language, Ros, that I didn't know or hadn't developed or hadn't put that script into play. And putting the script into play, we're just preparing ourselves to help us actually receive as well, to actually get our needs met. And as you said, the unmet needs. And I remember having a few clients, and I've shared this with them, where there was, like, say, dominant leaders within their group, whether it's male or female. And it's inviting the other person and actually saying to them, would you be open to me leading today? Would you be open to me leading the meeting? So we're actually asking for our needs. We're actually saying it in our own style. So, you know, pretty much what you just said before, we don't have to copy. We just got to create our own style. And what jacket are we wanting to wear? What is the style and what are the labels of who we are? Because if we were to take our identity away, who are we? And we can show up as that person and really be authentic and just ask them. They can say no, but at least you're inviting and you're kind of breaking that state as well and saying, would you be open to me leading today? Because I've actually got some fresh ideas and I just want to take the pressure off you today. You could even lead with that prior to the meeting. You could lead with it at the time of the meeting. So there's little ways that you can get those needs met.
And going back to your analogy about the bar, it's about recognising that you can put your hand up and go, me next.
Exactly. I love that. I love that.
All right, Kim. Well, that's probably all we've got time for today. So I really want to thank you for that. We've had a really interesting conversation, and it's one of those things that's, I think, really important for women in leadership roles to hear. The fact that there are different ways of doing it, that you don't have to be locked into, like you said, that story, the script, the over responsibility, the things that we've learned are things that, like a suit jacket, you can take it off and you can hang it up on a chair and walk away from it and pick up a different jacket and put that on and be a different person. And you can be flexible and have lots of jackets in your wardrobe.
Exactly. I love it.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate the conversation.
Oh, thank you, Ros. It's been wonderful. I've loved it.
Thanks for joining me on the Archetype Effect. If this episode sparked an insight, share it with a woman who leads, or leave a review so more women can find these conversations. Until next time, lead with purpose and power that feels like you.